Welcome to my channel, where every story pulls you into a new mystery, every case tests your instincts, and every clue brings us one step closer to the truth. In today's case, we follow Hercule Poirot as he ventures deep beneath the city, into an abandoned labyrinth of stone tunnels and forgotten water tanks, where a mysterious leak inside a subterranean aquarium threatens to reveal a secret someone desperately wants buried. Stay with me till the end, because what begins as a simple crack in the glass soon unravels into a hidden network of lies, stolen evidence, and a truth that has been leaking into the darkness for years. So, pick up your cup of tea and get comfortable, because today's case is worth every second until the very end. Chapter 1: The Water Beneath the Glass. It was during the 7th evening of the International Marine Architects Convention that the sea crept onto the land. The gala had unfolded beneath the polished glass dome of the Galathea Subterranean Aquarium, a marvel of modern engineering tucked beneath the cliffs of St. Mawes on the Cornish coast. The structure itself was a kind of boast, a fusion of deep-sea habitat and architectural audacity, sealed away in glass and reinforced steel. Rare eels glowed like blue whispers in the walls, and octopuses coiled in their illuminated chambers with unsettling intelligence. Dame Celestine Vane, the indomitable patroness of oceanic preservation and widow to a shipping tycoon, had commissioned the aquarium herself. Tonight, she presided in icy elegance near the Atlantic viewing trench, watching a bioluminescent squid ripple past like a lantern adrift in ink. But even she could not command what came next. At precisely 8:42 p.m., a tremor, a subtle shudder more sensed than felt, rippled through the chamber beneath the ocean. Guests paused. Glasses trembled on the white linene tables. A champagne flute toppled. A voice broke the unease. "It's nothing, just the water pumps," declared Alan Draycott, the aquarium's director, with brittle confidence. He forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. A scheduled flush of the lower tunnels. But Poirot noticed the glance exchanged between Draycott and a sharply dressed woman with silver hair and hawkish features. She stood near the seaweed exhibit, her fingers clenching her evening clutched too tightly. A flicker of fear expertly masked. Most curious. The party resumed, but Poirot, who had been quietly sipping his coffee and nibbling on a cube of honeycomb, tucked away the details. When one has been the premier detective of Europe, one learns to listen to tremors beneath the surface, both literal and human. That tremor, however, had been more than symbolic. At 9:06 p.m., a junior technician named Colin Vexley discovered something disturbing while inspecting the maintenance corridor. The floor beneath Viewing Hall 3 was damp. He radioed it in. The water was seeping not from above, but from below. From the reinforced base plates of the central trench window. A leak. No alarm was raised. Not yet. The aquarium, after all, was a sealed fortress beneath the tides. Redundant systems. Emergency drainage. It was likely nothing. But Poirot, drawn by subtle currents, had already excused himself from polite society. He had been invited as an esteemed guest, not as a detective. Yet he felt the chill at the edge of his reason, that intuition which so often preceded murder. The evening continued under glittering lights and soft conversation. Then at 9:47 p.m. someone screamed. It was not a theatrical scream. It was raw and ugly and final. Poirot arrived first. Dame Celestine was already standing near the edge of the Viewing Hall 3 corridor, her face bleached white beneath the chandelier glow. Others gathered behind her, murmuring in horror. On the floor, half submerged in spreading salt water, lay the body of Dr. Miles Fenwick, a retired naval hydrologist and consulting engineer on the aquarium's structural integrity. His head twisted at an unnatural angle. A trail of blood blooming from his temple, diluted by the creeping water. Poirot stepped forward. Hastings, loyal as ever, arrived moments later, having come from the buffet line with a plate of smoked salmon and rather startled eyebrows. "Good Lord," murmured Hastings, "is he?" "Oui," Poirot said softly. "He is dead, mon ami. And not from natural causes." A small, waterlogged toolbox lay near Fenwick's body. One screwdriver remained in his hand, loosely clenched. His other hand gripped the edge of a floor panel, as though he had tried to pry it open before the final blow. Alan Draycott was already there, pale and sweating. He said he wanted to check something with the floor seals. Something about misalignment. I never thought. Poirot said nothing. He knelt. The water was rising slowly, a trickle still seeping upward from a corner seal. But the body, the angle, the bruise, the drag marks, these told a different story. It was not a death by accident. Dr. Miles Fenwick had been killed. Struck from behind. His head then lowered into the puddle to create confusion. The body is staged. The setting was manipulated. This was no mere architectural failure. Poirot rose and adjusted his cufflinks. His mustaches twitched as if registering the scent of deceit. Behind him, footsteps echoed, nervous, expectant, afraid. A crowd was forming. Already Poirot heard voices whispering names. Alan Draycott. Dame Célestine. The icy woman near the kelp chamber. Her name, he would learn, was Madeleine Shaw, the aquarium's chief legal advisor. Colin Vexley. The technician. The Romanian marine biologist, Dr. Livia Petrescu. Even the elusive donor Mr. Rafe Tillinghast, whose wealth had ensured the Galathea's construction but who had refused to attend tonight's dinner until now. All had reason to be here. All had secrets. Poirot gazed into the depths of the great glass wall. Somewhere behind that shimmer of water, electric blue jellyfish pulsed in eerie procession. "Mon cher Hastings," he murmured, "it seems that murder has found its way even beneath the sea. And I suspect, this leak is not merely water." The true fracture, he knew, ran between human hearts. And it had begun. Chapter 2, The First Clues Beneath the Surface. The body of Dr. Miles Fenwick was moved with quiet ceremony, placed under a protective tarp while the guests were gently but firmly ushered into the upper-level conservatory, away from the scene and the steadily rising unease. Hastings and Poirot remained behind, standing in the aquamarine half-light that flickered across the now cordoned viewing hall 3. "The coroner is on his way," said Inspector Hensley, a local man with a strong chin and cautious eyes. "But as far as I'm concerned, this was an accident. The poor fellow slipped while inspecting a pressure seal. Blunt trauma from the fall. We'll confirm soon enough." "Non," said Poirot quietly, his voice as precise as the crease in his pocket square. "Forgive me, Inspector, but that explanation does not satisfy. The mark on the head, it is angled, is it not? Slightly diagonal from above." Hensley frowned. "Could be. He might have fallen backward." "Mais non," Poirot insisted. "A man falling backwards does not clutch a screwdriver still in hand, nor drag his body toward an access panel after receiving a mortal blow. And what of the damp footprint?" "What footprint?" Poirot led them a few steps away from the body. There, barely visible against the concrete floor slick with salt water, was a partial tread, a boot sole smaller than Fenwick's own. The water had distorted it, but its presence was clear. "A visitor, perhaps," Hensley offered. "This is a public aquarium after all." "But this corridor was locked before the dinner," Poirot said mildly. "Monsieur Draycott told us as much. Access restricted after 7 p.m., unless opened by a senior staff member." The inspector muttered something under his breath. Hastings, who had been pacing with an air of restrained impatience, glanced back toward the flickering trench glass. "I still say it was damned foolish to build a banquet hall beneath the ocean. One crack and we'll all be—" "Hastings," Poirot interrupted gently, "you must calm your imagination. The engineers of this structure were not amateurs. If anything, it is not the sea we must fear but what people do when submerged in their own secrets." "Secrets," Hastings echoed. Poirot said nothing. He had already begun to turn over the little gray cells, watching as suspicion rose like silt disturbed from the ocean floor. At that moment Alan Draycott returned with a towel around his shoulders and shoes soaked. His earlier composure had cracked. His eyes darted too quickly and his breath came in shallow puffs. I've checked the lower pumps. There's been no catastrophic breach. Just a leak in one of the observational drains near the maintenance shaft. Easily contained." Poirot tilted his head. "And Dr. Fenwick, did he speak of this leak before the dinner began?" Draycott hesitated. "Yes. He'd voiced concerns. Said the floor vibrations were unnatural. But Miles always worried. He was obsessed with structural perfection." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "So obsessed that he would risk venturing here alone during a gala? Unsupervised." "He had clearance," Draycott said a little too quickly. The response lodged itself into Poirot's mental ledger. They walked back toward the access panel that Fenwick had evidently attempted to open. It was locked and the lock had not been tampered with. Poirot knelt and ran a gloved hand along the hinge. "The panel is dry," he murmured. "Curious. The water rises, yet this point remains untouched. Almost as though it began leaking after the scene was staged." "You believe the leak itself is part of the deception?" Hastings asked. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it is simply a veil, an atmospheric distraction. One cannot stage a murder in a quiet drawing room without arousing an alarm. But if the room floods, Eh bien, then one focuses on the water and not the wounds. Draycott opened his mouth, then shut it again. A man drowning in his own alibi. Poirot stood and smoothed his lapels. I will speak to Dame Celestine, he announced. She is, after all, the creator of this aquatic palace. And creators, mon ami, are never far from their creations when something goes awry. As they walked away, Hastings whispered, Do you think she could be involved? Poirot gave a slight shrug. She is a woman of command. But command and complicity, these are not always the same. No, Hastings. I seek something far more delicate than opportunity or access. What then? Contradiction, Poirot said simply. A truth that does not belong with the rest. At the upper level, the guests gathered in uncertain huddles, sipping nervously at wine that now felt like an affront to the evening's mood. Dame Celestine stood near the orchid alcove, speaking in low tones with a sharply dressed woman who must be Madeleine Shaw. As Poirot approached, she turned, composed as always. Monsieur Poirot, she said, I regret that your visit has taken such a grim turn. Death, Poirot replied with a gentle bow, often arrives where it is least expected. But I sense that this death, madam, was not a matter of mischance. It was intentional. She said nothing, but her jaw tightened, ever so slightly. I must speak with each of your guests, Poirot added softly. Discreetly. It is necessary. You will have full cooperation, she said. Whoever did this, if indeed it was murder, has brought shame to this place. That I will not permit. Poirot's gaze flicked to Madeleine Shaw. Her silver hair gleamed under the aquarium lights. Her expression was unreadable. In that case, madam, Poirot said, let us begin with those who were closest to Dr. Fenwick. For you see, the sea may hide many things. But people, they carry their secrets not in the depths but just beneath the skin. And with that, the first layers of the mystery began to lift. Chapter 3, The Gathering of Suspects. The guests were collected in the coral atrium, an echoing space adorned with living coral walls and gentle light diffused through curved glass ceilings. The atmosphere was heavy with salt and suspicion, the scent of seaweed oddly mingling with the fading aroma of roasted pheasant and claret. Inspector Hensley had cordoned off the lower levels, but it was clear even he deferred to Poirot now. The great detective moved among the crowd with practiced ease, his presence like a scalpel, quiet, sharp, and unavoidable. The suspects had not yet been accused, but they felt accused nonetheless. A waiter passed with a tray of untouched drinks. No one reached for them. Poirot studied each face before the interviews began, observing the way people held their arms, shifted their weight, glanced over their shoulders. Every human being, he often said, was a study in geometry, angles of guilt, planes of fear, curves of motive. Alan Draycott stood near the artificial tide pool, his tie loosened, face damp with anxiety. He had worked with Dr. Fenwick for nearly 8 years. Their rapport, while collegial in public, had always carried a subtle strain. Draycott's vision was grand, futuristic, Fenwick cautious and mathematical. They had argued over construction phases, over costs. Hastings remembered a quote from Fenwick's article in Marine Engineer Quarterly, ambition must not drown science beneath aesthetics. Then there was Madeleine Shaw, ice in human form. A former barrister turned corporate counsel, she was famed for her precision and unflinching composure. She watched Poirot approach with the poise of a woman who expected to be scrutinized, and was fully prepared for it. May I be of assistance, Monsieur Poirot? She asked, voice crisp as frost. You were speaking with Dame Celestine earlier, mademoiselle? She is my employer. We were discussing legal ramifications should tonight's incident prove to be more than an unfortunate coincidence. And do you believe it was? She tilted her head. I believe that if it was, we will discover it in time. The law does not fear darkness, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot gave a slight bow, committing her phrasing to memory. Dame Celestine Vane remained seated near the glass anemone sculpture, untouched by the tremors of panic. In her late 60s, statuesque and still commanding, she wore her widowhood like a crown, regal, somber, untouchable. Her late husband, Charles Vane, had died in a yachting accident some years ago, and since then she had funneled her vast wealth into oceanic causes. Poirot observed the room through her eyes for a moment, a domain of power, elegance, and carefully curated relationships. And now a death, a flaw in the glass. He turned next to Dr. Livia Petrescu. The marine biologist stood alone by a digital reef display, tapping her fingers against her forearm in a rhythm of nerves. Romanian by birth, Oxford educated, and known for her work on coral symbiosis, she had arrived late to the gala and was notably absent during the initial moments after the murder. Dr. Petrescu, Poirot said. You knew Dr. Fenwick well? She blinked, startled. I worked with him during the initial reef engineering phase but not recently. He didn't like my methodology. Said I was too theoretical. You were not present when the body was found. No, she said too quickly. I was in the medbay. A mild allergic reaction. Shellfish. She gave a wan smile. Irony. Poirot made a soft hum. Allergies could be real. Or convenient. Colin Vexley, the young technician who discovered the leak, was the least guarded of them all. He sat on the edge of a display tank, fidgeting with his maintenance badge, hair still damp from his earlier inspection. I didn't touch anything, he told Poirot before being asked. I just saw the water pooling and radioed it in. And Dr. Fenwick, he was already gone. I swear. You respected him? Sure. I mean, he was strict, kind of cold. But he was brilliant. He once shut down a whole filtration unit because of a single decimal error. Poirot nodded. The kind of man who made enemies by being right. And finally, Rafe Tillinghast. He was the outlier. The financier whose money had made the Galathea possible. Reclusive, younger than the rest, and dressed not in formal wear but a sea-green Nehru jacket and dark slacks. He had declined to attend the dinner, only appearing after the scream. Crowds unsettle me, he explained, sipping green tea. And I abhor fundraisers. But murder? That, at least, is interesting. Poirot found him curious. You knew Dr. Fenwick? Barely. I write checks, not schematics. And yet you chose to fund this endeavor with no personal stake? Tillinghast smiled. A man's motivations need not be transparent to be sincere. Poirot's mustaches twitched. But when glass cracks, monsieur, sincerity is not what leaks out, it is the truth. Tillinghast inclined his head, amused. Poirot stepped back and surveyed the room. There they were, the scientist with theoretical ideals, the technician with nervous hands, the financier with a riddle for a soul, the lawyer of glacial restraint, the grieving philanthropist, the ambitious director. Each is capable. Each flawed. Each present. Somewhere among them, the murderer had already made a single fatal misstep. Poirot only needed to find it. And in this aquarium of secrets, the air was beginning to smell of guilt. Chapter 4. The Arrival of Poirot. By morning, the subterranean aquarium stood beneath a veil of silence, broken only by the mechanical hum of life support systems that filtered the ocean through tubes and chambers. Yet beneath that calm, a storm brewed. Outside, the sea hissed against the cliffside. Inside, Hercule Poirot prepared for his day with deliberate grace, as though he were dressing for a duel rather than a murder inquiry. The guest suite afforded him was modest but well appointed. He adjusted his tie with military precision and ran a small silver comb through his mustaches until each strand obeyed. Hastings, already awake and fidgeting near the window, glanced over. I must say, old chap, you seem unusually calm considering the circumstances. Poirot turned, expression unreadable. Calm, Hastings? Not calm. Focused. You see, there is something quite unique about a crime committed beneath the sea. One does not have the luxury of open escape routes or vanishing footprints in the woods. Here, everything is contained. Controlled. Exactly my point. That narrows the field, doesn't it? Just so, Poirot replied. But mon ami, when the field is narrow, the motives must be deep. We are looking at a confined universe, an aquarium of ambition, jealousy, and fear. The murderer is still with us. By 10 o'clock, Poirot was in the observation lounge where Inspector Hensley had convened a temporary operations center. Charts of the aquarium's layout were spread across a polished wood table, while a digital feed of maintenance logs blinked softly in the corner. The inspector glanced up. We've had the coroner's preliminary report. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the base of the skull. No sign of a fall. No defensive wounds. So, said Poirot mildly, Dr. Fenwick was struck from behind. Possibly with the wrench missing from the open toolbox. Hensley nodded. Yes. Which could mean premeditation. Or opportunity. Poirot studied the diagram. And the access panel, the one he was prying at, was found locked. Exactly. Then someone wanted it to appear that he was inspecting something when he was attacked. Or, he truly was about to uncover something and the killer stopped him in time. Hastings leaned over the map. What lies beyond that panel? Main pipework from the Atlantic trench tank, said Hensley. And a pressure relay valve for the secondary observation corridor. Not accessible to guests. Technicians only. Poirot tapped his chin. Then the killer either had technical knowledge or assistance. They were interrupted by the sound of shoes clicking against tile. Dame Celestine Vane entered, flanked by Madeline Shaw. Both women carried an air of composure sharpened by adversity. Celestine gave a slight nod. "Gentlemen, I trust you are progressing?" Poirot inclined his head. "Madam, I require your assistance." She did not blink. "Whatever you need. I wish to begin formal interviews. Privately. Here in the lounge. I will begin with Mr. Draycott." Celestine exchanged a glance with Shaw. "Alan is fragile. This project was his child." Poirot's voice was gentle. "Yes. And when a child dies, madam, the parents are the first to be questioned." There was a beat of silence before Celestine turned. "I shall send him in." When Draycott entered, his shirt was crisply ironed, but the rings beneath his eyes told a different story. He sat as if unsure whether he was being honored or tried. "You knew Dr. Fenwick best," Poirot began. Draycott exhaled shakily. "He was brilliant. Difficult, yes, but brilliant. He didn't trust new materials, new methods. Always testing. Always warning of catastrophic weaknesses. He was convinced the trench window could crack under certain vibrations." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You disagreed?" "Of course. We used reinforced borosilicate. It's rated for twice the pressure we expose it to." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "you did not entirely dismiss his warnings, did you? You scheduled maintenance for the trench valves earlier that week." Draycott's hands fidgeted. "As a precaution. Or a cover?" Poirot asked gently but firmly. "To gain access yourself, without suspicion?" Draycott stiffened. "Are you accusing me, Monsieur Poirot?" "I am asking who, besides Dr. Fenwick, had knowledge of the leak before the murder." Draycott hesitated. "He told me during dinner. Said something didn't feel right in the flooring. He was worried the recent tremor had shifted the foundational weldings." "A tremor?" Draycott nodded. "Minor. But we had readings earlier that day. Just enough to cause microfractures, maybe." Poirot's gaze narrowed. "You reported this?" "No," Draycott admitted. "I wanted to assess it myself before causing a panic." "Ah, Poirot murmure. So he investigated alone, in secret, and died." Draycott stared at the table. "You think I let him go down there deliberately?" "I think," Poirot said, "that secrecy always has a price." As Draycott left, Poirot turned back to Hastings and the inspector. "The man is nervous, yes. But I sense a deeper fear, not of guilt, but of failure." Inspector Hensley frowned. "You believe him?" Poirot smiled faintly. "No, not yet. But I do not disbelieve him either. Truth, you see, is not always found in contradictions. Sometimes, it hides in what is too carefully rehearsed." He glanced toward the door. "Send in Madeline Shaw next, if you please. Let us see what the Lady of Ice has to say, when faced with heat." Chapter 5. The initial interviews begin. Madeline Shaw entered the lounge with the unshakable grace of a woman accustomed to scrutiny. Her heels clicked once, twice, before she paused to fold her arms neatly behind her back. She wore a deep charcoal gray dress suit, sharply tailored, the collar crisply starched. Her expression was unreadable, cool, attentive, prepared. Poirot gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please, Mademoiselle Shaw." She sat without hesitation, legs crossed at the ankle. Hastings, watching from near the console table, noted that even seated, she projected control. Not arrogance, no, something colder than that. Calculated neutrality. "I appreciate your time," Poirot began. "And I appreciate discretion," she replied, her tone even. "You will understand that I am also here in a legal capacity. Anything I say may reflect upon Dame Celestine or the institution. Bien sûr. And I, in turn, will only ask what is relevant to uncovering the truth." She gave a faint smile. "Truth is a slippery fish, Monsieur Poirot, particularly in salt water." "A curious metaphor," Poirot mused. "Yet accurate." He leaned slightly forward. "Tell me, mademoiselle, what was your relationship with Dr. Fenwick?" Her eyes flickered just once. "Professional. Occasionally combative. He distrusted me." "Because you are legal counsel?" "Because I represented cost-benefit pragmatism. He resented having financial considerations imposed upon his structural ideals." Poirot nodded. "And did this friction escalate recently?" Pause. "Last week," she admitted. "He refused to approve a batch of replacement pressure seals. Claimed the new supplier's composite ratios were flawed. But his own test data was inconclusive." "Did you override his recommendation?" "I deferred the final decision to Alan Draycott. It was his call and he chose to proceed. The seals were cleared for installation 2 days ago." Poirot tilted his head. And when did Dr. Fenwick learn of this? He threatened to resign. Claimed the aquarium would suffer a catastrophic breach within 6 months or 6 hours. He was prone to melodrama. Poirot steepled his fingers. And yet, he was found dead with a screwdriver in hand, prying at a panel near the newly installed seals. Madeleine's expression remained fixed, but the muscles in her jaw had tensed, ever so slightly. "I see where you're going," she said softly. "You think I had a motive. That I was protecting a decision, one that could have cost lives and reputation. Do you deny you had reason to silence him?" She met his gaze directly. "No more than anyone who disagreed with him in the last year. Which includes everyone in this facility, Monsieur Poirot. Scientists, architects, financiers, take your pick." Poirot gave a small nod. "Tell me, where were you when the scream was heard?" "In the administrative wing. Speaking privately with Dame Celestine." "Can anyone corroborate this?" "Yes," said a cool voice from the doorway. Dame Celestine herself had arrived, her expression unreadable but her timing precise. Poirot rose politely. "Madam, would you confirm that you were with Mademoiselle Shaw at the time of the murder?" "I would," Celestine said. "We were reviewing donor proposals for a new Mediterranean biome. We just finished a discussion about Dr. Fenwick's ongoing insubordination." "Interesting timing." Her eyes narrowed. "You suspect me now?" "I suspect," said Poirot carefully, "that truth resides in motive, not merely opportunity. And you, madam, had more invested in this structure than anyone else in the room." She did not flinch. Dr. Fenwick was brilliant. But he lacked vision. He saw flaws in everything. "I saw potential." "A potential he threatened to expose?" "A potential he exaggerated," she corrected. "He undermined us constantly. He thought the public should wait another year before opening the trench chamber. I said no. The world was ready." Poirot studied her. "And now, it must be explained to the world why your chief hydrologist lies dead near a suspicious leak. Dame Celestine sleeps tightened. Then find out what happened, Monsieur Poirot. But I advise you not to mistake stubbornness for guilt." Poirot bowed his head slightly. A wise warning. The two women departed in cool silence. As the door closed behind them, Hastings leaned in. "Well, they both had reason if you ask me." Poirot nodded slowly. "Indeed. But both are also creatures of strategy. Neither would act in haste. If either is guilty, it was planned, elegantly. And if they're innocent? Then the murderer has placed them in perfect alignment to take the fall. Which, mon ami, requires a mind almost as precise as mine." Poirot turned back to the files Hensley had left open. He stared at a list of technical staff members and their clearance levels. "We will speak to Dr. Livia Petrescu next," he said. "There is something about her story. How did she put it?" "Ah yes, shellfish allergy." But the menu, Hastings, did not include shellfish. Hastings blinked. "Are you sure?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mais oui." The hors d'oeuvres were vegan. A donor insisted. Curious, n'est-ce pas, to have an allergic reaction to something that was not served. He tapped his finger once against the table. "Let us see if Dr. Petrescu too is better at swimming in truth, or merely treading water." Chapter 6, The First False Lead. Dr. Livia Petrescu arrived with a hesitation that did not suit her credentials. Slender, wiry, and always in motion, she wore a white blouse beneath a navy cardigan, the sleeves pushed to the elbows as if expecting to return to the lab at any moment. Her dark hair was pulled tightly into a bun, but a few strands had escaped, curling at her temple. Her eyes, sharp but flickering, betrayed a mind that had not slept. She took the seat across from Poirot and folded her arms, defensive from the outset. "I hear you have questions, Monsieur Poirot. But I assure you I had nothing to do with Dr. Fenwick's death." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Let us begin, mademoiselle, with the matter of your absence when the alarm was raised. You mentioned to Hastings that you were in the med bay, experiencing an allergic reaction to shellfish." "Yes," she said, her gaze steady now. "A mistake. It was something I had eaten earlier, before arriving. I carry an EpiPen. I felt unwell and went to lie down." Poirot's brow arched ever so slightly. And yet the menu for the evening, as confirmed by the caterer, was entirely plant-based. No shellfish was present. Livia frowned. "I didn't say it was gala food. I had a late lunch at the research cafe, crab bisque. It must have lingered in my system." Poirot gave a faint hum. "A curious coincidence in timing, non?" She crossed her legs tightly. "I didn't know anyone would be killed, Monsieur Poirot." I felt faint. I excused myself. And did anyone see you go? She hesitated. No. But the medbay logbook has my signature. Time-stamped, 9:10 p.m. Poirot turned to Hensley, who flipped through a binder and nodded. Confirmed. The staff nurse returned at 9:35 and found her resting, disoriented but stable. Livia leaned forward. I'm a scientist. I believe in reason, not superstition. But even I know when something feels off. The moment I walked into the lower hall that evening, something felt wrong. Wrong how? Poirot asked gently. Not just the tremor. The air pressure. It was too cold and the lighting in the trench corridor had flickered. I noticed the color of the sea life in the trench glass was subtly off. The jellyfish, they were floating closer to the base than usual. Poirot gave her a long look. Such attention to detail. And yet, you did not share this concern with anyone? She lowered her gaze. I didn't think they'd listen. Hastings interjected. Because of your disagreements with Dr. Fenwick? Livia gave a bitter laugh. He thought my work on phototropic resonance in bioluminescent coral was a distraction. Pretty nonsense, he called it. He lobbied to have my lab moved to the surface annex. Did you resent him? Poirot asked softly. Of course I did. Her eyes flared. He was arrogant, dismissive. He treated women like irrelevant variables. But I wouldn't kill him. I wouldn't risk everything I've built. Poirot's voice dropped. But if you had discovered that he was right, that the aquarium was structurally compromised, would you have stayed silent to protect the institution? She stared at him, stunned. Or, he continued, might someone have feared that you would speak out? That your scientific testimony would damage their careers? Livia faltered. I don't know. Maybe. That place down there, it's not just glass and salt water. It's politics. Tensions. Poirot leaned back, eyes narrowed. And what of Rafe Tillinghast? She blinked. What about him? You arrived at the same time. Both donors. Both are close to Dame Celestine. Yet you've never spoken of your connection. Livia's face tightened. Because there isn't one. We met once at the launch gala. That's it. Poirot tapped his chin. And yet he speaks of marine biology with a confidence not common among patrons. Livia stood abruptly. I've told you all I know. If you have more questions, speak to my assistant. I need rest. Poirot watched her go. Hastings frowned. I'm not sure what to make of her. Nor am I, Poirot murmured. Her story is elaborate. Too elaborate. Either she is the most honest among them, or she has prepared her narrative too well. Inspector Hensley stepped into the room, holding a clipboard. We found something, he said. In Fenwick's quarters. A torn page from his engineering journal. It was in the bin, partially burned. Poirot took the paper and examined it. Scrawled across the top in dark ink. Sublayer distortion increasing, pressure variability not uniform. Possible sabotage? Must inspect the relay before launch. Beneath it, smeared as though hastily erased, was a name. Only the first letter remained visible. M. Hastings said. Could be Madeline. Or Miles, Hensley added. Or even maintenance. Poirot folded the page carefully. But the discovery will make a perfect weapon, for someone eager to redirect suspicion. They had, at last, the first false lead. Someone Poirot knew would try to use this torn page to cast guilt. Perhaps even to justify their own story. But if they thought Hercule Poirot would be so easily led, they had gravely underestimated his little gray cells. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. Poirot had always believed that truth was not merely uncovered. It was revealed through the unguarded turns of human behavior. He had, time and again, witnessed that lies rarely crumbled under direct accusation. Instead, they cracked beneath the weight of silence, subtle provocation, and the irresistible need to control a narrative. It was nearly noon when he entered the sunken cafe adjacent to the coral atrium, a curious place to orchestrate a murder investigation, but a perfectly civilized setting for observing human nature at play. The remaining guests and staff had been instructed to stay within the upper levels of the aquarium for the day. The cafe, now cleared of casual visitors, provided a sanctuary in which tensions could simmer. Poirot ordered a single espresso and seated himself at a corner table with a clear view of the room. Hastings joined him, still skeptical. What are we doing here? He asked, glancing at the empty cafe. We are not doing mon ami, Poirot said. We are watching. Now and then I shall speak to one of our suspects, lightly as a friend might. I shall mention a name, an object, perhaps a memory, and we shall watch what that name stirs. Hastings sighed. This sounds like theater. Poirot smiled. It is. And what is murder, Hastings, if not a drama written in haste and guilt? The first to enter was Colin Vexley, summoned under the pretext of a technician's debrief. Nervous as ever, he approached Poirot with the energy of a schoolboy unsure whether he was being praised or expelled. You wanted to see me, sir? Ah, Monsieur Vexley, Poirot said, gesturing to the chair beside him. Only a few words. You have been most helpful, none? It is no small thing to discover a body and still think to alert others. Colin flushed. Just did what anyone would. Did you know that Dr. Fenwick suspected sabotage? The technician froze. What? No. Poirot said. There was a note. Very faint. He was worried about the relay valves. Did you ever hear him mention this? Colin looked down. He asked me about pressure readings last week. Said the numbers were fluctuating too quickly. And? I said it was probably just recalibration. He didn't believe me. Said someone was tampering. Poirot nodded as if unsurprised. He did not trust easily, did he? No, Colin admitted. He thought people were careless. Poirot leaned in slightly. And you, monsieur, were you afraid of him? Colin hesitated, then shrugged. A little. He could ruin your reputation with a sentence. Poirot let the moment stretch. Did he ever threaten yours? Colin's throat moved as he swallowed. No. But I know he got a junior analyst fired last year. A mistake with a salinity sensor. Poirot nodded slowly. Merci. That will be all. Colin left in a hurry, shoulders hunched. Next, Poirot sent for Rafe Tillinghast. The enigmatic financier arrived with a half-smile and a silk scarf knotted at the throat, an artist among engineers. You don't truly believe this was a crime of passion, do you? Tillinghast asked as he sat. No, Poirot said evenly. Crimes of passion are rarely so clinical. Tillinghast sipped at a cappuccino the waiter had brought him. Then what was it? Cold revenge. Poirot watched him closely. Perhaps. Or perhaps it was fear. Fear disguised as strategy. And you think that's something I'd understand? Poirot tilted his head. You have invested much in this place, monsieur. But your interest in marine architecture seems unusual. Tillinghast chuckled. Not so unusual. My father drowned at sea. I was 6. Since then, I've always admired the arrogance of building beneath the very thing that took him. Ah, Poirot said softly. And Dr. Fenwick, did he share your admiration? Tillinghast's smile vanished. He once told me that my money was only good until the first stress fracture. That if I truly wanted to honor the dead, I'd fund disaster response programs instead of vanity projects. Poirot tapped his fingers once against the table. Harsh. Accurate, Tillinghast said, standing. But irrelevant. I didn't kill him. Poirot said nothing, only watched him walk away. Finally, he called for Madeleine Shaw a second time. She arrived cool and composed. Another round, Monsieur Poirot? Just a word, he said. I have a curious question. Did you know that Dr. Petrescu had an allergic reaction last night? Madeleine's eyes narrowed. Yes, Celestine told me. Why? I find it strange, Poirot mused, that no one else noticed. She left the dinner early, yet no one followed. Curious, don't you think, for someone so involved in trench research? Madeleine tilted her head. You think she used the allergy as an excuse? I think, Poirot said gently, that everyone here is playing a role. And someone has memorized their lines too well. He offered her no explanation. Just that cryptic phrase. When she left, Hastings turned to him, frowning. What was all that about? A test, Hastings. Pressure, as in the aquarium walls, reveals weakness. Madeleine did not flinch. Colin nearly cracked. And Tillinghast, he said too much for a man with nothing to hide. But none of them confessed. No. But one of them, Poirot said, eyes gleaming, has already betrayed themselves. They simply don't know it yet. He looked back at the empty cafe, the sea pulsing faintly beyond the walls. Now, he murmured, let us see how far the cracks go. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. The aquarium staff had done their best to carry on with dignity, but the atmosphere inside the Galathea was shifting. What had once been a triumph of design now felt like a sealed chamber of dread, every hiss of pressure and every flicker of artificial light an echo of what had been lost. Dr. Fenwick's death hung over the facility not like a storm, but like a tide that had receded and was quietly preparing to surge again. It was just past 3 o'clock when Inspector Hensley reappeared in the operations lounge, his expression creased with fresh concern. Poirot, he said, we have another problem. Poirot set down his teacup. Ah, At last, the murderer grows nervous. Hensley looked grim. One of the internal document safes in the administrative wing has been forced open. Hastings blinked. Forced? You mean broken into? Precisely. A technician found the lock pried apart. It's not a large safe, meant for donor contracts, engineering blueprints, that sort of thing. And what is missing? Poirot asked quietly. A folder, Hensley said. Project Triton. The name lingered in the air. Hastings frowned. What's Project Triton? Hensley flipped through a document in his hand. Apparently it was a contingency plan. A full systems audit and potential closure proposal, written by Fenwick himself, months ago. The idea was to identify any latent vulnerabilities in the trench glass structure and to recommend either reinforcement or partial shutdown. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmure. And he wrote this while the aquarium was already preparing for its public relaunch? Exactly. The plan was dismissed internally, marked as speculative overreach. But now the entire proposal is gone. Poirot stood slowly, his gaze sharpening. Let me see the safe. They followed Hensley to the upper wing, where behind a frosted glass office door labeled Strategic Records, the small safe sat beneath a side desk, its metal casing warped and the hinge visibly tampered. Fine metal shavings littered the floor like gray dust. Poirot examined it closely. Crude, he said. No finesse. This was not a safe cracker but someone desperate. Someone using a basic tool, likely from the technician's workshop. Hensley sighed. We're doing an inventory now. But the only missing file is Project Triton. Poirot straightened, hands behind his back. Then we must ask, who had access to this room? And more importantly, who would fear what that file contained? He turned to Hastings. We must assume the murderer is not finished, Hastings. They are not merely hiding what has been done, they are actively altering the battlefield. At that moment, Madeline Shaw appeared in the hallway holding her mobile device. Inspector, she said crisply, I was just informed by the assistant archivist that 3 pages of donor documentation are also missing. Poirot looked at her. Pages related to whom? Rafe Tillinghast, she said without blinking. Specifically, the clauses regarding his emergency withdrawal rights and liability clauses tied to structural safety. Hastings gave a low whistle. So, Poirot said softly, the financier who claimed no connection to scientific affairs may, in fact, be legally entwined with its failure. Madeline nodded. If Dr. Fenwick's Project Triton had been made public, Tillinghast would have been forced to either refund his contributions or accept legal exposure if anything went wrong. Poirot's mustaches twitched. And that would make him very interested in eliminating the voice warning of doom. Hensley crossed his arms. That's motive enough, I'd say. Perhaps, Poirot said, but his tone was not triumphant. He turned to Madeline. Did you mention the safe's breach to anyone else? No, she said. Only you. Then we must assume the thief still believes their theft has gone unnoticed. That will give them confidence, and confidence breeds mistakes. As she turned to leave, Poirot added gently, Tell me, mademoiselle, did you ever read Project Triton? Madeline paused at the door. Only the abstract. It was dense, highly technical. But the tone was clear. Fenwick believed the trench glass would one day fail. She disappeared down the corridor. Poirot turned to Hastings. We must tread carefully now, mon ami. We are no longer simply unraveling a murder. We are watching someone rewrite history in real time. Do you think it was Tillinghast? Hastings asked. He has the motive. Perhaps. But Tillinghast is arrogant, not sloppy. This break-in, it smacks of panic, not calculation. No, this may be the work of someone who believed they were safe, and has only just realized they are not. From somewhere in the depths below, a faint vibration passed through the floor. A mechanical thrum, distant yet present, like the breath of some great creature hidden behind steel and glass. Poirot felt it through his shoes. He turned back toward the central dome. The aquarium leaks water, yes, he said softly. But now it leaks something far more dangerous, fear. And fear, he knew, would push the killer to act again. Chapter 9, Hidden Connections. The Galathea's aquarium chambers may have been forged of glass and reinforced steel, but it was now clear to Poirot that the true walls of this place were made of secrets. Beneath the polished corridors, between the scientific briefings and elegant dinners, an intricate network of relationships had been silently pulsing, veins of hidden history, quiet alliances, and debts both financial and emotional. And one of them, Poirot knew, had fractured. He began the day's next inquiry not with an interview, but with a visit to the archival annex tucked behind the administrative wing. The assistant archivist, a red-haired woman named Clara Hodge, greeted him with a furrowed brow. "You're the detective," she said, blinking rapidly. I suppose you'll want to see the donor logs?" "If you please, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "And anything that connects Dr. Fenwick to Mr. Tillinghast beyond the standard acknowledgments." She led him into a narrow, temperature-controlled corridor lined with sliding files. Her hands shook slightly as she withdrew a manila folder. "This one contains preliminary project grants. Not many people know this, but Mr. Tillinghast didn't just donate money. He requested the right to appoint an engineering consultant during the aquarium's final expansion phase." Comment. Poirot lifted his brows. "A silent partner in technical design?" She nodded. "It was buried under secondary clauses. The consultant never appeared, at least not formally, but Fenwick knew about the clause. I heard them arguing about it once. He said Tillinghast was buying a back door into the project." Poirot tapped the folder gently. "Who else knew of this?" "Only Madeleine Shaw, I think." She co-signed the agreement. A murmur of thought stirred within Poirot. He thanked Clara and stepped back into the corridor, considering his next move. As he walked, Hastings approached with a notepad in hand. "I've been going through the guest logs and dinner seatings since last night," Hastings reported. "There's something odd. Dr. Petrescu wasn't originally scheduled to sit at table 3. Poirot turned. "Non? Then who was?" "Fenwick." But shortly before dinner began, their names were swapped. No official explanation. Poirot nodded slowly. An adjustment was made quietly. Suggestions of someone wanting to separate them, or to ensure one wasn't seen with the other, Hastings added. They returned to the observation lounge where Inspector Hensley was speaking with Colin Vexley. The young technician stood awkwardly, glancing between them like a cornered rabbit. "I'm telling you," he said, "I only handled the panels Fenwick asked me to check. I didn't go near the safes." Poirot stepped forward. Monsieur Vexley, a brief question if I may. Do you recall who accessed the maintenance terminal 2 days ago in the lower corridor?" Colin blinked. Just to me. And Dr. Fenwick. But I think Draycott might have used it late in the evening. I saw the system logs. It pinged an after-hours login around 11:20 p.m. Poirot turned to Hensley. "Do we have a record of that login?" Hensley flipped through his logbook. "We do now. You're right, Vexley. Alan Draycott's credentials were used, but I doubt he mentioned that." Colin nodded. "He didn't? But I thought it was weird, he's not usually the hands-on type." Poirot thanked him and watched him leave, then turned back to Hastings. "You see? The lies are like seaweed, thin at first, then tangling." He requested a private audience with Dame Celestine next. She entered composed as ever, her silver hair pulled back and her mouth set in a line of calm endurance. Yet Poirot noticed her rings had been turned inward, a small, unconscious act of withdrawal. "I presume you've heard about the missing file," he began. "Yes. And I've ordered every security panel reviewed. You knew about Project Triton, of course? I approved its commission, though not its conclusions. Miles was brilliant, but he was also a pessimist. He saw flaws where others saw progress. Did you know he suspected sabotage?" Her eyes darkened. "He alluded to it once. Vaguely. He said something was out of alignment, but it could have been his own paranoia. Was he ever specific?" "No. Though he did mention, oddly, that the aquarium had become too interdependent. That we had allowed too many roles to blur." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And what about Rafe Tillinghast?" Celestine stiffened. "He provided nearly a third of our funding. Did you know he once sought to override Dr. Fenwick's material vetoes?" She hesitated. "That request never passed my desk. But Madeleine Shaw co-signed it." Her silence deepened. Poirot leaned forward. "Tell me, madam, did you know that Dr. Petrescu once studied under Dr. Fenwick as a graduate student?" That surprised her. "No, I didn't." They shared a long academic history. One filled with intellectual tension, and perhaps betrayal. A connection neither has mentioned. Celestine sat very still. "So this was never about the aquarium. It was about people." "Always," Poirot said gently. "And when people suppress connections, mon ami, it is because those connections expose motive." He stood slowly, the outline of the web now emerging with clarity. Fenwick had been closing in on something someone else had tried very hard to erase. But erasure left its own footprints. And beneath this glass sea, those prints were beginning to glow. Chapter 10, Poirot's Secret Clue. Poirot stood once more before the panoramic trench glass in viewing hall 3, where it had all begun. The soft pulse of bioluminescent sea creatures rippled across the depths, casting fractured shadows against the polished floor. The crime scene had been cleaned, the water dried, but the trace of violence remained, lingering not in blood but in silence. He closed his eyes. Not to reflect but to listen. Something elusive stirred in his mind. A sound not quite right. A detail overlooked. He crouched beside the sealed maintenance panel, the same one Dr. Fenwick had been found prying open. Slowly, reverently, Poirot ran a gloved finger along the floor's edge. The sealant was intact. There was no sign of deliberate tampering. And yet, a faint residue of salt remained, crusted in a narrow groove just beneath the steel rim. Not around the panel, but on the far edge near the decorative paneling. That was odd. He tapped the base lightly with his knuckle. It rang hollow. Then he moved 3 tiles to the left and tapped again. Thud. Poirot rose slowly, his eyes gleaming. Subtle, he murmured, but fatal. He turned back toward the exit, only to find Hastings approaching, looking breathless and rather excited. "I say, Poirot, Inspector Hensley just found something." Behind Dr. Fenwick's desk, wedged beneath the radiator. A torn envelope. "Go on." "It's addressed to Dame Celestine. From Fenwick. Dated 2 days before the gala. It says, 'If anything happens to me, look beneath the relay corridor, segment 4. Poirot's brows lifted slightly. "The segment where the panel lies." "Exactly." Poirot took the letter and reread it with care. He knew. Fenwick knew someone might silence him. And he left a map for someone else to follow. Poirot tucked the letter into his jacket. "But we will not tell Dame Celestine," he added. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because the real test is not what they confess, Hastings, but how they behave when they believe they are still unobserved." They returned to the central command room, where Inspector Hensley had gathered the team for a private update. The safe's breach had been documented, the missing pages listed, and access restrictions tightened. But Poirot remained quiet. He said nothing of the salt crust or the dull thud beneath the floor panel. Not yet. It was his clue. A secret card. Instead, he asked calmly, "Have we accounted for all the toolkits?" The room fell silent. Hensley frowned. "They're inventoried by lockers. Each senior technician has a keyed cabinet. Check the cabinet assigned to Colin Vexley." 15 minutes later they returned. "The wrench is missing," Hensley confirmed. "The kind that matches the probable murder weapon. And the lock on the document is safe," Poirot said. Hastings frowned. "But surely Vexley, he's too timid." "Isn't he?" Poirot said nothing. He rose and walked toward the digital blueprint display. With a flick of his hand, he brought up the cross-section of the trench corridor. His finger hovered over segment 4. "This is where Fenwick was investigating. This is where the water leak appeared." He turned to Hensley. "Inspector, you must secure this corridor. Immediately. No one is allowed to enter without my presence." "Do you think there's still danger?" Poirot nodded solemnly. "Not only danger. I believe the final piece of this puzzle is hidden beneath that floor. And when we find it, the murderer will no longer be able to hide." That evening, after hours, Poirot returned to the corridor alone. Armed with gloves, a flashlight, and Draycott's maintenance key, he knelt beside the panel. The thud was real. With a practiced motion, he loosened the bolt and removed the tile. Inside was a shallow compartment, one not listed in the architectural diagrams. Resting within, a length of severed pipe insulation, a pressure valve cap with tool marks around the rim, and a tiny piece of paper folded tightly. He unfolded it. The ink was faded but readable. Tampered calibration. Second valve deliberately weakened. Notify above. No signature. But Poirot already knew who had written it. He replaced the objects and sealed the compartment again. He said nothing to Hastings, nothing to Hensley, nothing to Celestine. Because now he did not need to trap the killer. He only needed to give them the illusion of safety. He would let them breathe just a little longer while the noose was already tightening. For in murder, as in the sea, it is the unseen current that pulls the strongest. And Hercule Poirot had found the undertow. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. Word of the concealed compartment had not spread, but its effect was already at play. By the following morning, the corridors of the Galathea were charged with a new and sharper energy. The suspects, now bound more tightly by both proximity and paranoia, moved with brittle alertness. Polite greetings turned to clipped nods. Accidental glances lingered too long. Trust, like a stress fracture in glass, had begun to splinter silently beneath the surface. Poirot observed all of it, moving like a shadow through the aquarium's upper galleries, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, mustaches serene. He did not need to interrogate anyone today. Not yet. Today they would speak to each other, and that, he knew, would reveal far more than anything they might offer him directly. It began with Dr. Livia Petrescu. She was seated in the observation café, notebook in hand but her pen unmoving. When Madeleine Shaw entered briskly to collect a document from the adjacent staff desk, Livia's posture stiffened. "You didn't tell Poirot about the test," she said without preamble. Madeleine turned sharply. "Excuse me?" "The structural integrity test," Livia continued, low-voiced. "The one Fenwick ordered 2 weeks ago. It was supposed to be conducted in private." "I didn't know it was completed," Madeleine replied, though not with conviction. "You knew enough to suppress the results." Madeleine's jaw tightened. "I followed the procedure." "You followed the reputation," Livia snapped. "The aquarium's. Yours. Celestine's. But that pressure report, if it showed what I think it did, then Fenwick was right. And now he's dead." They stared at each other in silence. Poirot, hidden behind the reflective coral sculpture just outside the café, smiled faintly to himself. Elsewhere, Alan Draycott had cornered Colin Vexley in the technician's corridor near the service elevators. "Why did you mention the login timestamp?" Draycott hissed. "You had no reason to bring that up." Colin flushed. I thought it might help." Poirot asked about system access. "You know damn well I used my keycard to reset the trench lights. That's all." "Then why not just say so?" Draycott exhaled, agitated. "Because in this place, every flick of a switch turns into suspicion. And because you always look like you've done something wrong." "I didn't touch the wrench," Colin muttered. "I didn't take anything." "Let's hope they believe that." A door creaked and both men turned sharply, only to find Rafe Tillinghast standing in the hall behind them, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Curious," he said mildly, "how the guilty are always the first to panic." Draycott stepped forward. "No one here is guilty until Poirot says they are." "On the contrary," Rafe replied, his voice silk over iron. "Guilt begins the moment one forgets the truth." He walked away, leaving the corridor in tense silence. Poirot, having witnessed both encounters from a nearby access hatch window, adjusted his cuffs. The glass was trembling now. Metaphorically, yes, but that was always the first kind of break. Later that afternoon, Dame Celestine convened a private meeting in her conservatory, no lawyers, no assistants. Just Madeleine, Draycott, and herself. "I want the truth," she said without ceremony. "No more evasions. If either of you believes there's something I must know, something that could become a scandal, I want it now." Madeleine stood ramrod straight. Fenwick believed there was sabotage in the trench corridor. He believed someone had deliberately weakened a seal. Draycott stared at her, stunned. "You never told me this." "He approached me the day before the gala," she said. "He said he feared someone was interfering with his calibrations. I thought he was being paranoid." "Why didn't you come to me?" Celestine demanded. "Because I didn't want to escalate his fears into a media disaster unless I had proof." "And now?" Madeleine hesitated. "Now I fear he had it." Draycott turned pale. "You think this place could fail?" "No," Celestine said firmly before Madeleine could reply. "I've seen every design revision. Every material grade. It was built to endure. But people," she exhaled sharply, "people are another matter." Outside the door, Poirot stepped back from the frosted glass panel, having heard enough. When he returned to the observation dome, Hastings was waiting for him. "Something's happening," Hastings said. "They're unraveling." "Yes," Poirot said softly. "Precisely as I hoped." "Isn't that dangerous?" "Non, mon ami. It is necessary. Guilt, like a trapped gas, must rise. And what we are seeing now, fractures between allies, whispers of betrayal, these are signs of pressure. The killer feels it." Hastings glanced out at the trench beyond the glass, where the jellyfish still pulsed with soft, mechanical grace. "What now?" he asked. Poirot smiled faintly. "Now we let them stew just a little longer. Tomorrow we press harder. A confrontation, perhaps. Someone will break. Someone must." He touched the glass gently, almost reverently. "This aquarium," he said, "was designed to contain pressure. And? It will fail," Poirot said, eyes distant. "But not the way they expect." Chapter 12, The Confrontation. By the following morning, the Galathea's polished floors and ocean-hued lighting no longer disguised the tension woven through its every corridor. The glass dome above the atrium, once a marvel of engineering, now felt like a looming, fragile eye, one that watched every movement with increasing suspicion. Poirot stood in the main rotunda, perfectly still, hands resting on the handle of his cane. He had summoned just one person to meet him here this morning, Alan Draycott. The director of the aquarium arrived 10 minutes late, looking slightly disheveled, his usual fastidious appearance dulled. He offered a tight smile as he approached. "I heard you wished to speak with me privately, Monsieur Poirot." "Indeed," Poirot said, stepping aside and gesturing toward the steel bench beneath the artificial kelp canopy. "Please." Draycott sat stiffly. Poirot remained standing. "I have noticed, Monsieur Draycott," Poirot began, "that in your every response since the murder of Dr. Fenwick, you have sought to defend the aquarium first and yourself second." Draycott's brow creased. I suppose that's accurate. The project is my life's work." "Ah," Poirot said gently, "but that is precisely the point, is it not? Your life's work. Not Fenwick's. His was a work of warning. Yours, a work of pride." Draycott flinched. "What are you implying?" Poirot leaned slightly forward, his voice soft. "I believe that Dr. Fenwick uncovered something dangerous. And I believe that he planned to reveal it, formally or otherwise, at the gala." Draycott's jaw tensed. "That's speculation." "No," Poirot replied, "that is deduction." He drew a folded paper from his coat pocket and handed it to Draycott. The man took it reluctantly. It was Fenwick's warning letter to Celestine, the one found behind the radiator. Draycott read it, his lips tightening with each line. "You've had this the entire time?" Poirot said nothing. Draycott stood. "Then you know I had nothing to gain by silencing him. If this letter had reached her—" "Ah," Poirot interrupted, "but it did not. Because someone removed it before it could be delivered. Someone who knew what it meant." Draycott hesitated. "You think I took it? I think you had a motive. An access. You used your keycard near the relay corridor at 11:20 p.m., 2 nights before the gala." Draycott looked stunned. "I went to check the lighting. There was a calibration fault." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet you said nothing of this until I confronted you with the record." "I didn't want to be implicated," he said, voice lower now. "It would have looked bad." Poirot stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Non, monsieur. You were not afraid of implication. You were afraid of confirmation. That Fenwick was right. That there was a fault. That you ignored it." Draycott's shoulders slumped. "I didn't kill him," he said quietly. "But I ignored him. I knew he was growing desperate, writing reports, speaking to people behind my back. I thought he wanted to take control." Poirot studied him carefully. "Did you enter the maintenance corridor that night?" Draycott shook his head. "No. I didn't know he was there. I didn't even know about the calibration note until you found it." Poirot was silent for a moment, watching him. Then he stepped back. "Very well, Monsieur Draycott. I believe you, for now." Draycott looked up. "Then who?" But Poirot was already walking away. Later that afternoon, Poirot requested Madeleine Shaw to join him for a quiet walk along the aquarium's rear promenade, the only place where artificial daylight streamed through long vertical windows into the deep blue depths of the trench wall. It was silent save for the occasional murmur of passing water. "I imagine you know why I've asked you here," Poirot began. "To accuse me," she said coolly. "Non," Poirot replied. "To offer you one final chance, to tell me the truth before I force it from your contradictions." Her expression flickered. He continued. "You knew Project Triton was real. You knew what was in it. You co-signed the liability clause for Tillinghast. And you knew about Fenwick's private tests." "I did," she admitted. "But that doesn't make me a murderer." "No," Poirot said. "But lying about it does." She looked away. "I advised against releasing his findings," she said quietly. "He was acting outside protocol. We needed time to assess, to ensure that what he'd found wasn't just theoretical noise." "But time was not on your side," Poirot replied. "Because the gala was coming. Because Dame Celestine wanted a relaunch. And because Fenwick, like all men who speak the truth too loudly, had become inconvenient." Madeleine turned back to him, eyes sharp. "You're wrong. I never touched him. I wanted to delay him, not kill him." "But you did delay him, no?" Poirot asked softly. "And someone else made sure the delay was permanent." She said nothing. Poirot gazed out toward the jellyfish gliding past the trench glass. "He wrote a name before he died. Only an initial. You, Madeleine. Or perhaps, Miles. His own." Madeleine frowned. You think he left a dying message? Poirot nodded. I think he tried. But I also think he wasn't finished. He turned to her fully. And neither am I. The web was tightening. The time for traps was nearly over. Tomorrow Poirot will close the circle. But tonight he would let the suspects sit in their unease. For the guilty had already begun to confess, in everything but words. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. It was just after midnight when the Galathea's quiet hum shifted, an almost imperceptible change in its mechanical rhythm. The aquariums continued to glow in tranquil blues and greens, the artificial tides undisturbed. But Poirot, alone in the guest wing and already half-dressed for bed, froze at the faint beep of movement from the corridor alarm system. Not loud. Not panicking. Just unplanned. He rose instantly, slipping his jacket over his silk pajamas and tapping lightly on the adjoining door to Hastings. Hastings emerged moments later, bleary-eyed and shoeless. What on earth? Someone is moving, Poirot whispered. And not where they should be. Within minutes, they were descending the staff staircase, Poirot moving with a grace that belied his age, Hastings stumbling behind him. When they reached the corridor leading to the technician's level, Poirot held up a hand. A faint metallic sound drifted through the silence, something unscrewing or being forced open. They turned the final corner, and there, bathed in the low emergency glow of the underpass lighting, was Colin Vexley. He was crouched beside the relay corridor service hatch, a toolkit open at his feet. His hands trembled as he tried to unscrew a panel embedded in the floor. Stop. Hastings barked instinctively. Colin spun around, eyes wide with panic. I'm not doing anything. Poirot stepped forward, calm and composed. And yet, monsieur, you are very much doing something. I swear, Colin's voice broke. I wasn't trying to escape. I was trying to fix it. Fix what? Poirot asked softly. I found the leak. Colin stood shakily. Or rather, I realized how it was made. Someone tampered with the secondary valve, not by force, but by subtle recalibration, just enough to create false pressure over time. If I can reverse it before the inspector finds out, I can prove I didn't do it. Poirot studied him. So your motivation is not to conceal a crime, but to erase the appearance of one. Yes. And you think this will save you? Colin hesitated, then nodded weakly. I know how this looks. Everyone thinks I'm too nervous, too weak to be innocent. But I didn't kill him. I found the wrench missing from my locker and I panicked. I thought, if I could just fix it, they'd stop looking at me. Poirot knelt slowly beside the panel. You are a clever young man, he said gently. But you are not a murderer. Colin looked up, startled. No? Hastings asked. No, Poirot said. Because a murderer does not revisit the scene to undo the fault. They trust their deception will hold. A guilty man would flee. But Monsieur Vexley, he seeks correction, not evasion. Colin sagged with relief, dropping to his knees. I didn't think anyone would believe me. Poirot offered a small, kind smile. The innocent rarely believe they can be believed. Inspector Hensley arrived moments later, summoned by Hastings' message. When he saw Colin, the tools, the open panel, his jaw tensed. He's not the killer, Poirot said simply. He is an opportunist in desperation. But not a murderer. Then what do we charge him with? Hensley muttered. Tampering? Poirot shook his head. Let him go. Let him rest. He may yet help us in the morning. Colin, trembling, was escorted to the security office for questioning. Poirot remained behind, gazing down at the open panel. Inside he saw it, the slight twist on the valve's adjustment ring, a near-invisible scarring of the metal, as if someone had used a tool too large or too imprecise. A deliberate weakening, Poirot whispered. Not enough to fail immediately, but enough to create tension. Enough to justify a sabotage theory. Hastings leaned in beside him. To draw attention? Non, Hastings. To mask a murder. The leak was the magician's misdirection. The real trick, the real crime, was in the body itself. Fenwick had to die, and the leak gave the perfect stage for confusion. He stood, dusting his knees. But now the trick has failed. Our magician is no longer in control of the illusion. They returned to the guest wing in silence. But Poirot did not sleep. Instead, he sat in the dark, fingers steepled beneath his chin. By morning, the suspects would awaken to find the pressure shifting again. Because a killer had tried to adjust the machine. And the machine, guided by Poirot's hand, was now turning back upon them. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The next morning arrived on soft, shifting tides. Outside, the sea mirrored the sky in pale grays, its vastness cloaked in low mist. Inside the Galathea, the illusion of calm returned, for those unaware of what brewed beneath the surface. Poirot, however, had never felt more certain, not just of the crime, but of the mind behind it. He stood once again before the panoramic trench glass in viewing hall 3. The leak had stopped overnight. The corridor was dry. The emergency repairs made by Colin Vexley had been quiet, precise. The danger had passed, or at least the visible danger. Hastings joined him, rubbing his eyes and sipping a bitter black coffee. "I've had 2 hours of sleep," he muttered. "And I still don't see it, Poirot. Vexley's not the murderer, and Draycott is too frazzled to pull off anything complicated. That leaves Shaw, Celestine, Petrescu, or Tillinghast. And yet none of them." Poirot raised a hand. "Stop, Hastings. You are looking outward when the truth lies inward." "Inward? Inward to motive," Poirot said. "To intention. To psychology. To contradict." He turned from the glass and walked slowly through the corridor, passing the maintenance panel, the conduit junction, the place where Fenwick had died. "All along," Poirot said, "I asked myself, why here? Why now? Why commit murder inside a sealed aquarium? A place with limited exits, continuous surveillance and closed ranks. Because they couldn't wait? Non. Because they wanted it to look like something else. An accident. A technical failure. A tragedy foretold by Fenwick's own obsession." Poirot stopped before the very spot where Fenwick's body had been found. He was struck from behind. "No defensive wounds." Which tells us he knew his attacker. Hastings nodded. "That narrows it." Poirot's voice dropped. "But more importantly, he trusted them enough to turn his back." He pointed to the corner where the light from the trench refracted against the panel. "And yet there is more. Remember the note in his journal? Possible sabotage? And the missing folder, Project Triton. He knew the structural data was being manipulated." Hastings furrowed his brow. "Which means the killer had access to the files." Poirot nodded. "Access, and motive to hide them. But do you recall the most overlooked clue? The footprint." Hastings guessed. "No," Poirot said. "The tremor." Hastings blinked. The one before the gala began?" "Oui." A tremor was felt. Just enough to unsettle the trench chamber. But not enough to register on regional seismic sensors. "Curious, no?" Poirot paced slowly now, the rhythm of his thoughts accelerating. "There was no geological event. I checked with the Oceanographic Institute this morning." Hastings straightened. "So it was artificial?" Poirot smiled. "A staged vibration. Generated by manipulating the trench chamber's ballast system. A technician might do it. But a financier wouldn't even know where the controls were." He turned suddenly. Unless that financier had appointed a private engineering consultant behind the scenes." "Tillinghast," Hastings breathed. Poirot nodded. "A man who never appeared in public documents. Who never visited the site, officially. But who had an unnamed agent embedded within the design process." Hastings looked puzzled. "So who was the agent?" Poirot paused. And then he said it. "Dr. Livia Petrescu." Hastings stared. "She was recommended by a donor affiliate, handpicked for her work on coral stress systems, perfectly relevant to trench wall dynamics. And she had just returned from a private fellowship funded by the same maritime trust as Tillinghast's philanthropic foundation. It was all hidden beneath paperwork. But the connection is clear." Hastings shook his head slowly. "But why would she kill Fenwick?" "Because he found her out," Poirot said. "He discovered she was altering his stress models, feeding false data into the simulations. At first she said nothing. But when he began to document the discrepancies, when he wrote Project Triton, she knew it was over." Poirot walked back toward the main atrium, the final threads falling into place. "Remember her allergy?" he said softly. Hastings blinked. "Yes, except there was no shellfish." "Correct. It was an alibi. She needed to vanish during the critical time, and she chose a med bay no one would question. A place where she could reappear confused, innocent, and sympathetic." Hastings gave a low whistle. "And the missing wrench?" "Taken by her, planted in Colin Vexley's locker. Not to frame him, but to create chaos. A distraction. An easy suspect." Poirot reached the stairway, where a shaft of early light filtered through the glass dome above. "And the footprint," he added. "Too small for Fenwick. Too fine for Draycott. Not a man's shoe at all. A woman's." Hastings exhaled. "So it's her. She did it." Poirot gave a final nod. She did. And now, mon ami, we will prove it. He adjusted his cuffs, his face calm. The time has come, he said, for the final gathering. And with that he summoned them all. Chapter 15, The Final Gathering. The Galathea's central atrium had never looked more austere. Beneath the towering kelp chandeliers and iridescent reef tanks, 7 chairs had been arranged in a half-circle, facing a low dais where Poirot now stood, flanked by Inspector Hensley and a silent, steady Hastings. The guests arrived one by one, each summoned personally, none daring to decline. Dame Celestine came first, regal and silent, followed by Alan Draycott, whose eyes bore the sheen of a man sleep-deprived and cornered. Madeleine Shaw arrived shortly after, her silver hair coiled tightly at the nape of her neck, her expression one of polite skepticism. Rafe Tillinghast entered with theatrical slowness, taking in the setup like a man watching the opening act of a familiar play. Colin Vexley was escorted in last, his shirt untucked, eyes darting. Dr. Livia Petrescu arrived a moment later, composed as always, though Poirot's gaze noted the faint tightness in her jaw. Once they were all seated, Poirot stepped forward. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice calm, deliberate. It is never pleasant, this moment. The gathering of those bound by fear, suspicion, and, most importantly, truth. For the truth is no longer buried beneath seawater and steel. It has floated to the surface. No one moved. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and walked slowly along the semicircle. A man is dead. Dr. Miles Fenwick, chief hydrologist, and a man of exacting standards. He died not because he was careless but because he saw too clearly. He paused before Colin Vexley. You, monsieur, found his body. You feared you would be blamed. So, in desperation, you returned to the scene last night, hoping to erase the signs of weakness you were certain others would interpret as guilt. Colin's cheeks burned, but he nodded faintly. Poirot moved on. Madeleine Shaw, he said. You suppressed critical findings from Project Triton, and allowed Mr. Draycott to override safety concerns. What? Because you believed Fenwick exaggerated? Or because you feared the consequences of confirming he was right? Madeleine didn't answer. Poirot turned to Rafe Tillinghast. You funded this aquarium, monsieur? But more than that, you funded the structural design, insisting on embedded influence through private appointments. You placed a consultant inside the scientific core of this project. A woman with a brilliant academic background, and a motive to ensure the success of your investment. Livia Petrescu remained still, her hands folded in her lap. Dr. Petrescu, Poirot said, now standing directly before her. You falsified data in the trench stress models. You downgraded the pressure curve projections. And you removed safety warnings from Fenwick's reports before they reached the board. I did no such thing, she said quietly, though a ripple of unease passed through the room. You had access, Poirot said, raising his voice slightly. You had a motive, to ensure the project was launched on time. And you had a benefactor. Tillinghast shifted in his seat, his lips parting slightly. I funded research, he said. That's not a crime. No, Poirot agreed. But covering up sabotage is. He returned to the center. Dr. Fenwick discovered the truth. He found irregularities in the structural system. He suspected sabotage. He documented it. And he confronted the one person who could have altered his calculations without drawing attention. He faced Livia again. You. She shook her head. You have no proof. Non. Poirot opened his hand and revealed a folded page, found beneath the panel in the relay corridor. This note, in your handwriting, written in haste, perhaps regret, tampered calibration. Second valve deliberately weakened. Notify above. You wrote this as a failsafe. As a scientist does, knowing the truth must surface eventually. But it was too late. He confronted you before you could decide what to do with it. Livia's eyes flared. That could have been planted. It was beneath the panel you accessed, Poirot said. And your alibi, your allergic reaction, was staged. The menu contained no shellfish. The medbay log was self-signed. A gap, neatly timed between the moment Fenwick descended and the moment his body was found. Dame Celestine rose to her feet. Is this true? She asked, voice sharp. Livia? Livia stood slowly, drawing herself upright, shoulders back. He was going to ruin everything, she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. All because of one fluctuation. One minor shift. He would have destroyed a decade of work. Do you know what it means to spend your life chasing truth, only to have someone bury it in fear? Poirot stepped forward. So you struck him. He turned his back, she said, eyes distant. I asked him to wait, to let me fix it quietly. He refused. He said he would alert the board that night. I didn't plan it. But it happened. And afterward? I loosened the valve slightly. Just enough to make the leak seem real. Enough to draw attention away from the blow. Poirot nodded solemnly. Thank you, mademoiselle. The truth at last. Hensley stepped forward, cuffs in hand. Livia did not resist. As she was escorted out, Poirot looked at the stunned circle of faces. The sea is vast, Miss Amos, he said. But it remembers. And here, beneath the weight of its glassy gaze, the truth could not stay buried. And so the circle closed. Chapter 16. The Reveal. Silence reigned in the atrium long after Dr. Livia Petrescu had been led away. The others remained seated, stunned, as if the very floor beneath them had shifted. In a way it had. The truth, long concealed beneath layers of suspicion and salt water, had surfaced, and with it, the weight of implication. Poirot, ever immaculate, stepped once more into the center of the semicircle, his voice as calm as the surface of the ocean after a storm. You are perhaps still struggling to understand how such a crime could unfold in this place. In this sanctuary of glass and light, beneath the sea. He turned to Dame Celestine, whose expression remained carved in a mask of cold fury. It began with ambition, Poirot said gently. Yours, madam. This aquarium was meant to be a legacy, a monument. And your trust in your staff, though admirable, was not blind. You delegated authority, you empowered those around you. But you did not see the quiet desperation that ambition breeds in others. Celestine spoke at last, her voice like crushed ice. She told me the data was sound. Indeed. And so did Draycott and Madeline Shaw and even Mr. Tillinghast, each in their own way. But Livia Petrescu. She was the bridge between science and structure. Between caution and execution. And it was she who rewrote the story Fenwick was trying to tell. Poirot walked slowly now, a lecturer concluding a complex theorem. She falsified the strain calibration values subtly. Not to cause collapse but to buy time. To meet deadlines. To satisfy donors. And when Fenwick discovered this, he did not shout it from the mountaintop. He went quietly, methodically. He documented. He left clues. He held up the worn, torn paper Fenwick had hidden beneath the corridor panel. This was his insurance. But even he underestimated the panic his discovery would cause. He thought she would confess. Instead, she struck him, one blow to the base of the skull. Not rage. Not frenzy. Control. Poirot turned to Colin Vexley. You, monsieur, found the leak not because it was dramatic but because it had to be just noticeable. Livia created the illusion of structural failure to distract from the truth of murder. Colin looked down as if the weight of it all had only now settled on him. And then, Poirot continued, she ensured confusion, a false allergy to vanish from the dinner. A stage d'absence. A planted wrench to seed doubt. He glanced at Madeline Shaw. You were her silent accomplice, though perhaps unknowingly. Your silence about the report, your deference to protocol, these were not crimes but they provided cover. Madeline did not reply. Her arms remained tightly crossed, her eyes elsewhere. Poirot turned finally to Rafe Tillinghast. And you, monsieur, supplied more than funding. You provided the stage. Whether you knew her methods or not, you created the pressure that made them necessary. Tillinghast gave a faint smile, but it did not reach his eyes. I funded a marvel, he said. I never asked her to murder. No, Poirot replied. But you made her believe failure was worse. Poirot stepped back. The murder was not born of malice. It was born of fear. Fear of losing a life's work. Fear of being silenced, discredited, forgotten. But as I have said before, truth does not stay buried. Not in soil. Not in water. He bowed his head. There is one final note, he said softly. Dr. Fenwick, in his final hour, left us a single initial. An M. Not for Madeline. Not for Miles. But for a message. He wanted someone to read between the lines. To see what he could not shout. That Miss Amos was his final act of brilliance. Inspector Hensley cleared his throat, stepping forward. Dr. Petrescu has made a partial confession, he announced. She admits to tampering with the calibration, and striking Fenwick in an act of, what she calls, scientific desperation. The room stirred but did not speak. Poirot turned to Hastings. It is done. Hastings gave a slow nod. And the aquarium? Will survive, Poirot said. But not unscarred. The wound is not in the glass, it is in the people who built it. And that, Hastings, will take longer to mend. Poirot looked once more toward the trench window, where jellyfish drifted like lanterns lost in time. A fragile place, he whispered. Held together by steel, water, and human will. And now, with the truth revealed, the sea at last was still. Chapter 17, Outcome and Justice. The arrest was carried out with quiet professionalism. No spectacle. No shouting. The echo of Livia Petrescu's footsteps as she descended the glass staircase with Inspector Hensley was the loudest sound in the atrium. She said nothing. Not to Poirot, not to Dame Celestine, not even to herself. Poirot watched her go with a grave, introspective stillness. There was no triumph in his eyes, only an old, familiar sadness. The kind he wore when the mind was sharp, but the heart had grown weary of seeing brilliance twisted by fear. She was the last person I would have suspected, Hastings said softly beside him. So calm. So precise. Poirot nodded. Yes. But calm can be the most dangerous mask of all. It hides the tremors. The desperation. They turned to leave the atrium, passing the now vacant chairs where the others had sat only moments before. Already the aquarium staff were returning to their duties. Filters hummed, exhibits glowed, and soft orchestral music resumed its echo through the glass halls. But the atmosphere had changed. In the executive office, Dame Celestine stood by the tall window overlooking the lower tide pools. She had removed her heels and stood barefoot on the cold tile, arms folded as she watched the incoming tide. Poirot approached without ceremony. I should have known, she said quietly. She was brilliant, yes, but always too eager to please. She believed she had to protect your vision, Poirot replied. Celestine laughed bitterly. And in doing so she destroyed it. Non, said Poirot gently. She fractured it. But not beyond repair. She turned to him, weary and regal all at once. Will this become a public scandal? That depends on you. I want the truth known, she said. Even if it costs us donors. Even if it means rebuilding from ruin. Poirot inclined his head. Then it will cost you a lot. But you will keep your soul. She gave a nod of thanks and turned back to the sea. Later that evening, as the last rays of sun refracted through the trench glass, Poirot and Hastings walked the promenade one final time. I must say, Hastings murmured, there was no one villain in this story. Everyone was complicit in something. Fear, silence, pride. Poirot adjusted his gloves and exhaled through his nose. That is so often the way, mon ami. A murder may have a single hand, but it is often borne on the shoulders of many. They passed the jellyfish tank, now fully relit. The creatures floated with elegant detachment, untouched by the chaos of the human world. Poirot stopped and looked into the glass. Dr. Fenwick was not an easy man to love. But he believed in precision. In warning others when danger approached. And she silenced him, Hastings said. Poirot shook his head. She delayed him. And in doing so she doomed herself. It was not hatred, Hastings. It was fear. And fear, when buried, becomes poison. The Belgian detective turned once more toward the stairs. It is done, he said. Justice of a sort has been served. Hastings followed behind. And what now? Poirot gave a soft smile. Now we leave the sea to its own mysteries, mon ami. We have uncovered enough. And as they ascended into the fading light, the waters of the Galathea whispered quietly behind them, holding their own secrets once more, some revealed, others. Chapter 18, The Closing Remark. The morning of Poirot's departure dawned crisp and silver, the Cornish sky a pale canvas above the cliffs that cradled the Galathea Aquarium. The sea was calm now, but not idle. It pulsed with quiet energy as if the ocean itself had exhaled after days of tension. Inside, the aquarium's great systems hummed with restored equilibrium. Pipes groaned, pressure balanced, and the corridor leak, once symbolic of a hidden rot, was now sealed both in metal and in truth. Poirot stood at the glass entrance, suitcase by his side, a charcoal gray overcoat draped over his arm. Hastings, already packed and fussing with a map of train schedules, turned to him with his usual mix of admiration and exasperation. Still thinking about her? He asked. Poirot gave a small nod. Dr. Petrescu was not a villain of theatrics, Hastings. She was a tragedy of intellect. She believed in control, of systems, of information, even of consequence. But, as I have often said, it is not the brain that commits murder but the heart. And hers was cornered. He paused, casting a glance toward the trench glass behind them, where the jellyfish continued their slow, luminescent waltz. She tried to prevent collapse, he said, and in doing so caused it. Hastings looked down. Do you think she ever meant to kill him? Poirot was quiet for a moment. Then, no. Not at first. But when a mind becomes so focused on protecting what it has built, it will do anything to protect the illusion of control, even if it must kill for it. A staff member approached, handing Poirot a small envelope. Left for you, sir, by Dame Celestine. This morning. Poirot took it, nodding his thanks. Inside was a note written in fine, elegant script. For the man who sees beneath the surface. The Galathea will continue, not as a monument but as a mirror. I see now that we must never let glass replace conscience. Merci. Poirot folded it carefully, tucking it into his breast pocket. She has learned, he said softly. Too late for one life. But perhaps not too late for many others. As the car pulled up to take them to the station, Poirot paused on the threshold of the aquarium, casting one last look inside. The lights shimmered over the reef tanks. Children pressed noses to the glass in wonder. Life in all its delicate, interconnected design went on. And then, just as he stepped into the sunlight, he turned to Hastings with a final murmur. You see, mon ami, in the end it was not the leak that betrayed them. Nor the broken seal. Nor even the missing file. It was the lie told with too much precision, and the silence worn like armor. Those things they crack, not with force but with time. He smiled faintly. And Hercule Poirot, he waits. With that, he stepped into the waiting car, his silhouette framed against the glittering sea, and was gone. Beneath the waves, the Galathea held firm, its walls sealed, its secrets laid bare. And above, in the bright morning light, the detective who had exposed it all vanished into legend once more.